Welcome back to the Fans the Home Team podcast. This is Kelsey, and this podcast is going to be my interview with my good friend and former classmate, J. Mike Johnson. J. Mike is a big Yankees fan, and his route to fandom is untraditional, as you'll hear during the interview. I promise he's not a bandwagon fan at all. Like Palmer from the podcast 2 weeks ago, J. Mike went to grad school with Miranda and I. He's always been somebody that I've looked up to, and there's not a nicer or more hardworking person that you're going to find than J. Mike. This interview was the second interview done for Fans of the Home Team almost an entire year ago. If you scroll all the way down on our Instagram page, you'll see the post for it. This interview made me realize that there are so many ways that somebody can become a fan of a team, and each person's story is so unique and interesting. I hope you enjoy it. J. Mike, tell me a little bit about how you became a fan of the New York Yankees.
I get a lot of heat for that typically when I even begin to say the word the New York Yankees, but I think I came into fandom a little bit different than most people would. My dad is a chaplain for Major League Baseball teams. So basically he's the team pastor is the best way to put it. When I was born in 1995, which if you're familiar is right about the time the Rays organization started. And so my dad was actually the original kind of like organization chaplain for the Tampa Bay Rays. So when I was really little, he was with the Rays organization. And so about the year 1999-2000 is when he actually switched over to the Yankees. If you think about like the formative years of someone's childhood, it's that age 4 is when you start playing t-ball. And as a baseball player, I always, was watching Major League Baseball games and all that stuff. And so the Yankees were just kind of the natural selection, despite, growing up in Tampa and being in the backyard of the Rays. The Yankees were kind of that easy option just with my dad being the team chaplain. And, the spring training facilities here in Tampa as well. So it didn't hurt to be able to go to spring training games and all that good stuff. But at the same time, having my dad kind of working for the team in some form of capacity definitely pushed me towards the Yankees over everyone else.
That's super different, obviously, than most people come into a fandom. What was that like? Like, what were your experiences like having your dad as the team chaplain?
It was really cool. I mean, there's no other way to put it. It is really cool. But at the same time, he was very respectful of the players. And so one thing I think I learned that was really important when I was growing up was that Major League Baseball players, any professional athlete that you look up to, they're just like you and me. They're just regular people. They're just really good at a specific thing. We all have something that we're really good at. Theirs just happens to be the sport that they play. The organization that he worked for that kind of paired him with the Yankees, they were very adamant about not taking advantage of the situation and being respectful of those players and their families and their times. And so anytime I got to spend with these players was behind closed doors and getting to see them for who they are. I got to, sit down with some of the guys in the early 2000s with the Yankees as an 8, 9, 10-year-old kid and hang out with their kids and hang out with, their families and get to see them from behind closed doors. So a lot of my favorite memories of growing up as a Yankees fan weren't necessarily at the stadium or at the ballpark. It was in the backyard, like throwing the football around or hanging out at a birthday party or something like that.
Tell me a little bit about like what a team chaplain's, responsibilities are day to day. Like how involved are they in the whole process?
So the team chaplain, the way Major League Baseball works is not heavily involved on like a day-to-day basis. It's more of a on-call type thing. So they do have like a weekly service on Sundays, just like church on Sundays. They have chapel on Sundays. And so chapel was done on Sundays for the big leaguers and Saturdays for the minor leaguers. And so that would just kind of for him show up to the ballpark and do some sort of a devotional that he had written out and then be there for the game. And then occasionally we'd have Bible studies in the off season or during the week if they were in town. But it's not as like, it's not like a manager or a team operations guy where you're there every day. It's more like a contracted position where you're there when they need you, really is the best way to put it. So not as like hands-on on a day-to-day basis, but you're more there when someone is going through something, they'll send you to the team chaplain, or if, there's the scheduled chapel services.
It's super interesting. Something that's not heavily talked about. I don't think in terms of professional sports either is, the faith around it at all too.
I'm really not allowed to like share names just because of like privacy things of growing up. But I've seen, my dad get phone calls the day after World Series championships. And then people say like, this is everything I've ever dreamed for. Like, is this it? And so hearing those types of conversations and hearing just the struggles that pro athletes face on a day-to-day basis has really kind of shown me that pro sports is cool. It's my favorite thing in the world. That sport or that accomplishment that these athletes have isn't what defines them at the end of the day. Like their identity are being fathers and being, family members or being husbands and wives or whatever sport you're a fan of. Like their identity, if they're doing it right, isn't their sport. It's their life outside their sport.
Your job's not your identity, whether your job is
right
playing baseball or whatever it might be. What are some of your favorite memories just being a fan and being around the team?
First is the 2000 World Series over the Mets. I think, the Mets was 2000, and that was pretty cool. The Subway Series, I remember my dad kind of hyping that up, and I was like 5 years old at the time, so I had no idea what the Subway Series was and all that good stuff, and quickly kind of came to understand it. So that was like one of my first memories is like the Yankees winning the World Series. We were kind of going crazy around the house and all that good stuff. So that was really fun. And I would combine almost with that, the World Series win in 2009. Not 2009, sorry. What a fan I am. I just blanked on that.
The worst.
But golly, but the World Series win then, and that was, after everything we've been through, the Yankees are supposed to be good every year. Like, why aren't they going to the World Series? And so, lost to the Diamondbacks, lost to the Marlins, like all these couple of years of losing. And then to get back on top was pretty exciting. So you combine those two together. But then I would say, fast forward like to 2 years ago, 2019, it was spring training. One of the Yankees, he was in AAA at the time. His name was Jorge Saez. He was living with our family. Jorge in spring training pinch hit for Aaron Judge. And we were actually sitting next to Aaron Judge's personal stylist, which is like, of course, he has a personal stylist. Like, how awesome is that, right? And so we're sitting there next to Aaron Judge's personal stylist, and like he's supposed to come up, but instead like Jorge comes in to pinch hit for him. And then Jorge hits a home run in Aaron Judge's like spot in spring training. And it was me, my dad, and my youngest brother, who's 10. And we were just going absolute nuts in the stands. And he kind of like gave us the point after he like hit the home run and all that and came across home plate. So just knowing that person, like knowing Jorge so well and seeing the struggle that he had been through as a player, and then see him kind of like have that really awesome moment of success in the middle of a spring training game here in Tampa is when I think about like one of some of my favorite moments in George Steinbrenner Stadium, which is the field here in Tampa. Like I always look back to I think back to that moment almost every single time of like having that just like rush of like, oh my gosh, it's going to go. And then the ball went out. So it's exciting.
Baseball players, especially, not that all athletes don't go through like working hard, but to go through the minors and to live that life, like that's unlike any other sport. And to see somebody come out of it even is unbelievable.
He tells stories of being 6 guys deep in a condo and the middle of nowhere and living the minor league lifestyle and all the bus rides and the whole 9 yards. So obviously it wasn't Yankee Stadium, but just to see him have that success, it was pretty cool.
What would you say has been some of your biggest heartbreaks being a Yankee fan? I know you guys don't have many of those.
Besides like 3 minutes ago when I said 2009 and I told myself I was wrong and I was actually right. That is number one, I think. But yeah, I looked it up while we were talking. It was the 2009 World Series. So that brain fart was correct. We're good. I would say the 2001 World Series, the loss to the Diamondbacks in Game 7, just heartbroken by, I thought Mariano Rivera was invincible. And so to see him give up the walk-off in Game 7 against the Diamondbacks, I remember being a child at like 6 years old, 7 years old, and just being absolutely crushed at that point. And then also, I mean, there's no hiding it, but the 2004 blowing the lead against the Red Sox and then allowing them to kind of come back. And then as they went on to the World Series, my cousin is a huge Red Sox fan. And so I'd been, up 3-0, was talking so much smack and was like, here we go again, baby. You guys are just going to blow it. Like, da-da-da-da. And then game 5 happens. And I'm like, it's okay. One game, whatever. And then game 6 happens. I'm like, well, this stinks. And then it's like, well, we better, game 7, like stop moving around. Let's get it together. And then ended up losing game 7. Like that's when I just developed an utter hatred for David Ortiz and Big Papi, just because of the damage he did during that. Like respect him as a player beyond belief. But as a Yankee fan, I was like, this guy stinks. Like what the heck? I would say that those 2 moments are probably the biggest heartbreak that when I think back of just like crushing. I think of the loss in 01 to the Diamondbacks, and then the 04 just the American League Championship debacle that was. So
my dad's a really big Red Sox fan, so I see that on the flip side of things, like saw that real time with him, how that's probably one of his favorite moments being a Red Sox fan is obviously that 04.
I'm sure it is. I hear about it still all the time.
What are some of those things that keeps you coming back as a fan year after year?
I think the history. I love the history of the New York Yankees. And some of my favorite highlights that I get to watch are like you see the 70s and the 80s and just like how insane the crowds were. Hearing the stories of like Joe DiMaggio and just the greats. Like there's just been so many great players throughout the history of Major League Baseball that have been Yankees. And I love the history of baseball more. I mean, baseball is just kind of my favorite sport. And so it being one of the most historical franchises, it's always like, okay, let's see who's next in line of history and kind of how the 100 plus years of Yankee baseball shapes the way the Yankees play baseball to this day. And just the tradition and the way they operate their organization hasn't changed very much, over the last several years. So I appreciate like that consistency and that effectiveness of their strategy. I bought all into the tradition a long time ago. But then the fan base is very welcoming. And if you're a Yankee fan, I should say, if you're a Yankee, you're a Yankee. It doesn't matter like where you're from or like what you do, but you're a part of the Yankee family. And so I think those two, like the tradition plus that family atmosphere that comes with fandom of a lot of teams, but I just feel like it is intensified with the Yankee organization.
Yeah, I mean, I remember growing up and you learn about the history of baseball when you're a kid, and the Yankees obviously come up more than anybody just because Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, DiMaggio, like all the World Series, Ruth calling a shot. Those are just stories that are told as a kid, is that Yankees history. And obviously they were very dominant back when baseball was just kind of getting started. I'd worked their spring training in 2018 down in Tampa, and you could just feel the history. You could feel the fandom. Like that place was packed every day. It was crazy to feel, especially not being a Yankees fan whatsoever. But it's still cool because it's still baseball.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think you go and everybody, and it's worldwide, everybody knows who the Yankees are. And so you see Yankees hats all across the world. It's a pop culture symbol, like all those things. And so a lot of family from Alabama and it's like the Roll Tide, like you can be anywhere in the world and someone says, Roll Tide, and someone's like Roll Tide, like, and give it back to you. But I feel like you see a Yankee hat and you'll go out of your way to another Yankees fan, just be like, hey man, go Yankees. It's like, go Yankees. And it's just kind of that same mutual respect of fandom, if you will.
That makes sense. I mean, I think a lot of teams have that history kind of like that, but not many are like the Yankees and go back kind of that far. What are some of your favorite players that you've watched over the years?
My favorite player for the Yankees of all time is Mariano Rivera. Like just the way he carried himself, the way his dominance, his like humanitarian work that he did on the side as well. Like I respect that a lot. So he's probably my favorite Yankee of all time. Like he's got to be 42. Mo is just like, that's his nickname, Mo, but Mo is just like genuine. He's one of the most genuine people that I've ever met in my life. And so I was always drawn to him, and he was a goofy guy as well, like funny. And so I appreciated his personality and just saw that like who he was off the field was the same person he was on the field. I mean, that meant a lot to me from a respect standpoint. And then when he was with the Yankees, I was a huge Robinson Cano fan, the way he played and having that lefty swing. But currently I would say my favorite player of the Yankees right now is Brett Gardner, a very underrated pick. I think not many people would pick, but I've been told when I wear a batting helmet that I look a little bit like Brett Gardner. Maybe it's the size of my nose. Like, I don't know what it is, but that could be it. But I like Brett Gardner. I like how he plays with hustle. I like how he plays hard, and he gives it, 100% all the time. And so I've always, been drawn to those hustle style players like himself. I'd be lying to you if I, didn't tell you that I wore number 2 all the way through Little League because of Derek Jeter. I, would practice jump throws in the yard all day, every day, just because of Derek Jeter and try to be like Jeter. Jeter was somebody that, again, just respected his, the way he carried himself, whether it was through interviews or whether it was, the toughness he showed on the field and the durability that he showed on the field for most of his career. I think of the play where he like dives into the bleachers and comes up like all bloody and all that stuff. And I think I had that poster on my wall as a kid. So Mariano Rivera, Derek Jeter, Brett Gardner, those are and Robinson Cano were probably top 4. And if I had to give you a fifth, I would say Andy Pettitte. I really liked Andy Pettitte a lot. Same thing, just the way he carried himself, like off the field. And he kind of, had the steroid issue, but he was one of the few people that like owned up to it and came clean with it and used it for good, if you will. Like, I think he, kind of became a positive impact because of that experience. So he was another guy that I just kind of looked up to for his personality as well.
Is there a player that ever got traded or left in free agency that like absolutely rocked you?
It's hard because like three of my favorite players were like lifelong Yankees.
Right. Yeah.
So like Jeter, Mariano Rivera, and then Andy Pettitte. And he had a short stint with the Astros, but for the most part, they were all lifelong Yankees. When Alfonso Soriano left, like I really liked him as a little kid. And so when Alfonso Soriano left and got traded he got traded to the Rangers in the A-Rod deal, that was one where I was like, dang, because he was like, on I think it was like MLB like High Heat like 2002 or something like that was a video game I used to always play. And Alfonso Soriano was my guy. He was my leadoff batter on the game, and he was someone I loved watching play. I thought he was an awesome second baseman. And so when they traded him in that Jeter deal, I was pretty like, dang, like I really liked him as a player. So I'd say that's the one that like hurt the most, if you will. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, my favorite players were kind of lifelong Yankees, and I was blessed to never really face that struggle, if you will.
That's so interesting, because being a Cubs fan, I remember when we signed Alfonso Soriano, like his contract was insane. It didn't work out to the amount of money we paid the dude. So I have a very different perspective of having Alfonso Soriano on my team.
So we had him here, and then you kind of had him on the downsides.
What is one thing you wish that if you could just stand up in front of the team and tell them one thing, what would that be?
There is a month called October, and you are allowed to win baseball games. I'm just kidding. It's kind of just like remember the tradition of the pinstripes. Like I think teams who have a great history, like there's this concept of just like, oh, well, we're our own team, but we don't really need that history anymore. But I'd say like there's just kind of this quote that I've been looking at as I like evaluate things in my life, and it's like have a respect for tradition, but a passion for, insert whatever that word is that you're working on in that moment. And so I would tell the Yankees, like, have a respect for tradition and have a respect for, the people that got this brand to this point it's in right now. But let's have a passion for winning. Let's have a passion for playing the way that we know we need to play today. It is kind of like what I guess my motivational speech would be, if you will.
That's a good one. I think they'd win a World Series with that if they heard it. If you were to take over as GM, what are the things you would do right away?
Growing up, my dream job was to be a GM for the New York Yankees. So I would definitely say I thought about this a lot. I would say I'd, promote Jorge Saez to the majors first and foremost. No, I'm just kidding. Send him down to single A. I really like the direction that the Yankees front office has been going the last couple of years. I think they're really doing a good job of balancing trading, aging talent to receive like young, fresh talent, and then using those pieces to get more pieces, if you will. Like I think they're playing both systems well of raising up farm talent as well as going out and getting that high ticket free agent market. I think the biggest thing that I would do is really sit down and figure out like what the future direction of our infield is. Because I think the biggest questions for the Yankees lately have been infield. The outfield's been on lockdown, and then you got Judge and Stanton kind of rotating in right, and then you got Hicks in center. So the outfield is locked down, doing great. But I think there's been some holes in the infield. And so it's not for lack of talent. It's just been kind of a lack of production. And so I think the first thing I would do when I got in there is really evaluate the direction of more so the left side of our infield, because DJ LeMahieu has been playing out of his mind on the right side of the infield, but really evaluate the left side of the infield and figure out kind of where we're going to go from there.
How would you describe the Yankees fandom in one word, and why?
I think it goes back to that family. That's like the New York mantra, right? Is like everybody, it's like, oh, your family. You have the Italian culture. You have all not even just Italian, you have all the different cultures that make up New York City, the melting pot that is New York City, the Latino culture that's there, the Irish culture that's there, and all these different cultures that, would fight against each other, would stop fighting specifically for Yankees game days, right? Like all the beef stops on Yankees game day, and we're all on the same team. So I think for me, it would be that family, because it does truly bring people from all over the world, all different cultures and all different backgrounds together to unite for kind of that one cause. And one of my favorite, quotes of all time is that unity doesn't have to mean uniformity. And so just to be unified for something doesn't mean you have to all look alike or think alike or talk alike or be alike. And so I think that's what's cool about like Yankees fans and fans of most sports, but specifically Yankees fans, just because you'll be in China and you'll see people wearing a Yankee hat. You'll be in the Dominican Republic and you see people with Yankee hats on. Like everywhere you go, people know who the Yankees are. And so it brings all different types of cultures together under one logo, under one symbol, and unites them for that cause. And I think that's a beautiful thing when that happens.
Right. I think it's just something that sports does really well. Absolutely. And the Yankees are obviously one of those top teams that can do that, but sports in general is just good at uniting people. I have to ask, what did you think when they tore down Old Yankee Stadium?
I was pretty upset. I'm a traditionalist guy. Like that's why it's so hard. And kind of like my background, I do a lot of like marketing and things like that. And so I have to really fight against myself a lot of times. Love tradition. I love history. And so a lot of struggle I face even in my own job sometimes is like, I'm emotionally attached to this. Like we can't get rid of this process, or we can't get rid of this idea because it's what's always been, And so that's kind of the emotions I went through as a, 15, 14, or I guess 13-year-old kid in 07, 08 when they tore down the stadium. And thankful, I guess, that I got to see the original Yankee Stadium. Like I did see the original Yankee Stadium before they tore it down. However, it was like tough because I think of like all the great players that have played there before and all the history, like I talked about, that I was really attached to. And I thought that's what made us the Yankees. And then when the new stadium opened, like there was a lot of bad reviews about it and a couple of like issues that the stadium was going through. And I was like, see, we never should have tore it down, like right. All that stuff. And so I was definitely skeptical. And I think it started to grow in me for sure, because they did do a pretty good job of like replicating a lot of things and just enhancing it rather than, completely throwing what was away. Like side stories, like one of my uncles had Lou Gehrig's disease when I was growing up. And so that kind of built my affinity towards Lou Gehrig during that time, just to like see my uncle go through that journey and then seeing the stories about Lou Gehrig. And I always love like, the like today, I consider myself so like the echo, the luckiest man in the life. And so like that like quote has always resonated with me, and knowing that like where that was and like all that good stuff, and thinking about that was kind of the main story that kept running in my head of like these incredible moments in baseball history have happened here. And now it's going to be like a parking lot, or like, it's going to be a, whatever they turned it into. And so that was like tough. I was like, no way, we can't get rid of the old stadium, but it's grown on me. I still would say, I wish they would have kept the old one, but at the same time, I, got to trust the brass, right? Being
a Cubs fan, like if they tore down Wrigley's Field, right, I think I would lose my mind. Right. Same way with Red Sox fans in Fenway. I think it'd be really hard to get over. And
that's what it is. I mean, Yankee Stadium was equivalent to those two ballparks in history. So, I mean, it was that as big of an issue it is in your mind. I think I would say equivalently, that's how it was in a lot of Yankees fans' mind. And it's not something people were super passionate about, if you will.
Last question. If you could tell the Yankees fandom as a whole what they have meant to you over the years, what would that be?
Man, I say I grew up with them, like as I've grown up, I've grown up with the Yankees, if that makes sense, and the fans that go along with it. So it's been cool to see the excitement that is shared with people. And so just that like community that's there. And it goes into a lot of what I've already said, but just like a lot of my memories from childhood are from high-fiving random dudes that I've never talked to and never will talk to, that were just in the stadium with me. And so it's like, they're your extended family that you don't really even realize are there, or don't realize that are in the background, if you will. And so it's cool to kind of like look back and think about like, oh, I remember like my 10th birthday when we were at the Yankee game and this happened, like da-da-da-da. And so the Yankee fandom is that like family that I grew up with.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast, and thank you to J. Mike for doing this interview with me and giving us an insight into your fandom. I'm incredibly excited for our next podcast. In honor of March Madness, Miranda and I are going to be doing a bracket. but not for college basketball. Our March Madness bracket is going to be for sitcoms, which is one of our favorite things to debate. I promise you won't want to miss it. Check out our link tree, which you can find in the description of this episode. This is our one-stop shop for you to find all of our social media accounts, and also sign up to share your fandom story with us. And so you don't miss any of our upcoming podcasts, subscribe to us on whatever platform you're listening on. And if you feel so inclined, go ahead and share with a friend or leave us a review. Every little bit helps. Thank you again, and we'll see you next Wednesday.